So the third presentation by Miyuki, Aoki, Girardelli, Orientalism. The title of her talk is Orientalism in the East, the Ottoman Experience of Japanese Diplomat Watanabe Hiromoto in 1876. Floor is yours.
Thank you for the introduction. I'd like to thank for the first of all, thank you to Aiko-san and Brackway to invite me to this interesting symposium, and thanks for the Center for Asian Studies, Kochi University and Japan Foundation. Today, let me share my screen. Do you see? Let me start my slideshow. Okay. So when I got contacted with Aiko-san and talking about Pan-Asianism, I'm an art historian. Listening to all the discussions by historians, from the first moment, I was thinking that what I can contribute to you. And maybe my presentation will be the third dimensional Pan-Asianism or visual version of Pan-Asianism. Recently, I am thinking. To start with, I'd like to start with this, of course, with this panel with Selçuk Hanım and Eldar Bey. Of course, it is like a panel of our exhibition. So, we had this exhibition 2010 for the Year of Japan, and I took part of the section of Ito Chuta, the architect. And after that exhibition, I wrote this book about Ito Chuta's travel to the Ottoman Empire. So actually, this suits to today's topic about the travel, but in connection with Pan-Asianism, I preferred to take Watanabe Hiromoto because Ito Chuta, when and speaking about Pan-Asianism, he is the most one of the most important figures in Japanese architecture, Pan-Asianism in architecture. But I preferred to remain with the connection of the Ottoman Empire, and his travel was in the rather beginning of his career. So in the end of my talk, I will go back to Ito Chuta, but to start with, I took risk because it is a new topic for me. So I hope that I can go until the end. Anyway, this morning I was happy to hear his name, Watanabe Hiromoto, in the talk of Professor Satley. In connection with Pan-Asianism of Kowakai in 1880. Today's topic, I'm going to start with Watanabe Hiromoto. He was born in Fukui in 1848. And his background is both Rangaku and Kangaku. That means with the Western studies and Chinese studies. Chinese studies is a tradition of Japanese intellectuals, and Rangaku, that comes from Dutch studies, but in general, in Meiji Japan, it means Western studies. And he was the person, very rare actually, in that period. He was fluent in German, English, and French, 3 languages. And he was appointed with Ministry of Foreign Affairs in 1870. That means when he was 21 years old, and next year, he was included in Iwakura mission that brought him to the world trip, because Iwakura mission starting from the United States and visiting all European major countries, and they came back through Asia. So at the age of 22, Watanabe already had the notion about the world, which is very rare as a Japanese in 1870s. And maybe that is why also he was appointed in the very young age, 25 years old. He was chargé d'affaires at interim in Vienna. That is the start of the connection with the Ottoman Empire for him. And then 1880, he was a member of founding member of KUASIA, as Professor Sadler suggested. And then 2 years later, he was selected as a senator member. And then he became a governor of Tokyo. Actually, that is amazing in Meiji period, how young people were active in those ages. 1886, he became the first rector of Imperial University. That means later the University of Tokyo. He was 39 years old. And next year, he became a founder of Kogakuin Daigaku. Then he was appointed as an ambassador to Vienna, Austria. And then he became, he founded a railway company and became a president. But at the same time, he was elected as a member of the House of Representatives, Shugin. And then 5 years later, he became a member of the House of Peers, Kizokuin, and he died at the age of 54. What a busy life. In 1901, he died. Then his trip to Istanbul was in 1876, when he was 27 years old. After his duty as a chargé d'affaires at interim in Vienna, he decided to make a private travel in return to Japan. He started his travel from London, going through Rotterdam, Berlin. Do you see the cursor here? St. Petersburg, and then Moscow, Kiev. Actually, he passed through today's very crucial areas. And then he went to Odessa, took a ship to Istanbul, and then to Izmir, Alexandria, Cairo, and then he took again ship to Aden, to Mumbai. From Mumbai, he traveled throughout India, going Agra, Delhi, Calcutta, Madras, and Ceylon also. And then he took ship to Saigon, going through Hong Kong, Shanghai, Tianjin, Beijing. And then he came back to Japan. The travel started 31 of January, 1876, ended, the diary ended 3rd of June. We don't know the exact date of his arrival, because the diary finishes when he took the ship to Japan. Actually, this travel is this is his library, his diary, unpublished manuscript in 2 volumes. Volume 1 including 130 pages, second 260 pages, preserved at Tokyo, the University of Tokyo. And maybe I am the person who read this from the beginning to the end, I don't know. Actually, his travel was partly known because he had a company, Nakai Hiromu, whose travel diary is already published. So most of the people know their trip. But actually, reading this manuscript, I understood that they had traveled partly together, partly alone. And Istanbul was a very crucial part because they arrived to Istanbul together, and then Nakai departed earlier, and Watanabe extended his stay in Istanbul for 1 week for certain reason that I am going to mention later. So his travel was from Istanbul to Cairo, to Alexandria. They met again, and then they traveled again together to Mumbai. And from Mumbai, Nakai decided to go directly to Japan. So Watanabe continued his travel alone until Japan. So actually, Watanabe's visit to Istanbul was officially told that it's a private trip, but apparently it is not. And as Nakai's travel diary was published already, people used to believe that Nakai was the main figure of this travel because he is 9 years elder than Watanabe. But reading Watanabe's diary, I found that Nakai was not very good at in foreign languages. And Watanabe was very fluent in German. So their visit to Constantinople was actually based on Watanabe's connection. And prior to that, Fukuchi Genichiro and Shimaji Mokurai, who was a part of Okakura mission, it is known that they visited to Istanbul in 1873, and they are the first Japanese who visited to the Ottoman Empire. And their aim of visit was about the research on juridical state of unequal capitulation, because Japan was forced to sign in 1858 to the unequal treaty. So actually, Watanabe and Nakai's visit to Constantinople was the second oldest visit after Fukuchi and Shimaji. And regarding that Watanabe was also the member of Iwakura mission. So there's another hidden mission for him in the same purpose. So yeah, and actually the relation between Japan and the Ottoman Empire is famous for this Ertuğrul tragedy, as that Abdülhamid II sent worship of Ertuğrul as a return visit of Prince Komatsu Akihito, who is the first imperial member of imperial family who visited the Ottoman Empire. But all these visits of Watanabe Hiromoto was before all these events. It was in 1876. His connection to the Ottoman Empire, the key person, was Mehmet Rashid Pasha, who was the ambassador to Austria at that period, and they met in Vienna. And in return trip, at the moment of the trip, Mehmet Rashid Pasha was in Istanbul and became the Minister of Foreign Affairs. So for Watanabe, it was convenient to visit because they were friends. And Watanabe apparently prepared the visit to Constantinople, as in Kiev he visited the consulate of Ottoman Empire and met Sabri Pasha also. So his visit to Constantinople was already informed to the Ottoman government. So when he arrived, actually within his return trip from London to Japan, it took 4 months. His stay in Istanbul was rather short. It is only 11 days. Arriving on 28th of February and leaving 9th of March. But it seems that his visit was organized previously. Just next day, he visited Rashid Pasha, and the day after, he had a meeting with Sadrazam Mahmud Nedim Pasha. I put 2 visuals because his dressing is in 2 ways, in traditional Ottoman and the Western style. Actually, Mehmet Rashid Pasha, when Watanabe visited, he himself told to Watanabe that I am the first minister who dressed in Western manner. That is a small point. So after his visit to Sadrazam Mahmud Nedim Pasha, no, I'm sorry. On the first day, he visited Mehmet Rashid Pasha. They gave tourist guide and brought a tour in Istanbul. The places to be visited is interesting because it is a kind of package for the foreign visitors that the Ottoman officials offered. They brought him to Hagia Sophia and Hagia Irini and Topkapı Palace. That is a 3 package. And then, of course, they showed the treasures. That is also all the foreign celebrities who visited the Ottoman Empire was invited to see these treasures. And of course, Watanabe mentioned the collection of Chinese and Japanese porcelains that Selçuk Hanım noted that Yoshida Masaharu was asked to classify all the porcelains. Anyway, before that, he also saw. And in this package of Istanbul touring, there is a tram palace that was brand new, finished in 1872. That means 4 years before the visit. And it was said that a special jest by the Sultan himself. Sultan means Abdülaziz. And also he visited Selimiye barracks and also Tersane, the shipyards. He stayed in Büyük Hotel d'Angleterre, today's Büyük London Hotel. Actually, in Pera, just next to Istanbul Research Center. This hotel was the first, one of the oldest hotel in Western style, although it seemed the building itself was not from the foundation. It was founded in 1854. And this hotel is actually later visitors from Japan, also like Tokutomi Soho or the others, they all stayed in this hotel. The location of the hotel is actually in the heart of Pera. That means in the heart of the embassies. Apart from the official visit, personally, on the date he arrived in the evening, he visited first here, Austrian embassy. Actually, Austrian embassy at that period was today's so-called Palazzo Venezia, where Italian consulate is. Because at that period, Italy was included, Venezia was included to the Austrian Hungarian Empire. So that building was used as Austrian embassy. The building was by Fossati. Anyway, the first private visit, the first day he arrived, before visiting the Pashas, Rashid Pasha, he visited the ambassador, Austrian ambassador to Constantinople, Count Frank Zizzi, this person. And on that evening, he immediately met two people, British ambassador Henry Elliot and a French ambassador. They were dining together. And then in 3 days, this Zizzi, the Austrian ambassador, brought him to Russian embassy to introduce him Ignatieff. And regarding the date, that 28th of February 1876, in March 1876, that is actually, it is the period that European conference at Constantinople, so-called, later on, was being held. And from his diary, there is a very active relations between Italy, between the ambassadors of Italy, Austria, France, and Russia. All the members of conferences were having meeting and also dinner every 3 days they used to have. And on the 2nd of March, Watanabe was invited to join this meeting because they are going to have important meeting on the 6th of March. So actually on that day, in daytime, Watanabe and Nakai bought a ticket for Alexandria, but Watanabe changed his ticket to stay, and Nakai continued his trip. And interestingly, on the date of 6th of March, the meeting was held. The diary is vacant. He didn't write anything. So this is the venue, Tersane Sarai. So as an art historian, I'd like to mention about the Orientalist style, so-called Orientalist style in architectural history, because as a person who came from more eastern part of down the Ottoman Empire, Watanabe was invited to visit this palace of Turan, which is actually in line of Orientalist taste, let's say. That means that using the styles not coming from the traditional architecture style of the Ottoman Empire, but using the so-called Islamic. In that period, they never used that word, but so-called Moorish, that means North African and Andalusian style, or different regions of Islamic country, that was fashionable in those periods in Europe. And Turan Palace was completed in 1872. Before that, there's Beylerbeyi Palace, completed 7 years before. And the Ottoman government used this kind of Ottoman Oriental atmosphere to the foreign visitors. For example, when the Crown Prince Edward, not Edward, I'm sorry, yes, Crown Prince Edward visited the Ottoman Empire after Abdülaziz's visit to Paris and London in 1867 during the exhibition, the Universal Exhibition in Paris. They paid many European celebrities or royal celebrities paid return visit to Constantinople. And the British Crown Prince paid return visit in 1868 with the Crown Princess, who is from Denmark, Princess of Denmark. And the princess accompany, who is the Count of Denmark, Count de Grey. She wrote in the diary that they visited this Beylerbeyi Palace, and she was so impressed by the beauty of this palace. That means that she says that I have never seen the more beautiful things than this. actually, when we look at the interior of the palace, it is a combination of Western style palace, like using the artificial marble, and Oriental style decorative elements. In the wall, we see with the carpet, of course, with the splendid Bosphorus views, but with the Western style furniture in decoration of Oriental, so-called Islamic decoration, as well as Western style lighting, etc. When we look at the ceiling decoration, we might think that this is a page of a book with the poetry, with the illumination like decoration with gold and traditional combination of the colors with red and green and blue, etc. And which is named as Neo-Ottoman style in the book, which is published as the first official book of architecture history in the occasion of 1873 Vienna exhibition with the patronage of Ibrahim Ethem Pasha. In this book, of course, they described all the past monuments of Ottoman culture, and in the end, they mention about what could be the future architecture style. And the author of the book, Pietro Montani, states that in line of Churahan Palace and Valide Sultan Jami in Laleli, this kind of architecture style called, he named Neo-Ottoman, this can be the future style of the Ottoman Empire. So the presentation with the suggestion by the Abdülaziz, his visit, I'm sorry, I put one page from Usul Mimari Osmani, L'architecture Ottoman. This was written in French originally, translated into German because it was presented in Vienna, and of course it was translated into the Ottoman also, and published in 3 languages. So the presentation of Churahan Palace to the Japanese visitor was not a coincidence. And as we know, Churahan Palace today, what we call, was burned in 1909 or 10, and rebuilt in very recently, 1980s, unfortunately by a Japanese constructor, and what we see today inside is nothing to do with the original, in my opinion. I'm sorry, it's a work by a Japanese constructor. What we can imagine through the photography is totally different thing, a combination with the Andalusian Moorish style with some elements of Ottoman tradition. And today, after the fire, only the part of Hammam is remained. And Watanabe describes that there there is a bathroom made of white marble, and the reliefs on it is very detailed. And also he describes the interior as he was very much impressed by the marquetry works and inlaid works, and also with the use of the luxury materials such as mother of pearls or mosaics. Actually, he uses the word mosaic in the text in Japanese that suggests the inlaid works, and also use of the lot of golds, and some the knobs of the drawer, etc., with pure silver, he describes. But interestingly, his impression is that they use so expensive materials, but there's no elegance, he says. In Japanese, 値は高かるべかれども風潮なし。風潮、elegance and nuance in Japanese language. Because he understood that this style is from Arabia, not from the original Ottoman. So in my understanding, Watanabe's attitude to this culturally mixtured styles, he didn't have that much of sympathy, but actually regarding to the other visitors from Japan to the Ottoman modernization, like Ito Chuta, the Japanese architect, he also had the same impression. That is interesting. In Japan, of course, they are in the process of modernization and producing the architecture in Western style, or also a combination with Japanese and Western style. But regarding to the other countries, non-Western countries, the attitude of Watanabe, both Watanabe and Ito are somehow similar, that they like traditional things, but they didn't like the contemporary new combinations of the cultures. That is interesting attitude. Fortunately, only one part of this Turan Palace is subverted. In Yıldız Şale Köşkü, this is the present state of Şale Köşkü. And I think not all the parts, but many parts with including furniture, and we see inlaid works that Watanabe mentions. And we have some photos thanks to Abdülhamid II's presented for the Chicago exhibition around 1888 to 93. The same room was appeared like this. In Oriental style space, they put Western style furniture in decoration of Oriental style. And here I'd like to, yes?
Miyuki Hocam, are you close to the conclusion?
I'm sorry, I
you
do.
can
Yes.
wrap up.
Okay. Yes, it's already 4:30. I'm sorry. So I will wrap up my presentation. Here we see interesting thing. This is the close-up. We see something look like Japanese, and today it is also here. And in the same room, the combination with Islamic Oriental decoration with Japanese ceramic porcelain presentation was done during the period of Abdulhamid II, at least. This is another view in front of the entrance of Sedef Salonu. We see the huge vase of Arita porcelain, which is like 150 centimeter, 1.50 meters size. Today we see it in Belle-Île Palace. So here we see in Ottoman Orientalist approach, there is a combination with Ottoman traditional thing as well as the other area of Islamic countries, and they combine Japanese porcelains in the same aesthetics. In regard to this kind of huge vase are very specially made in Arita because it is very difficult technically. And during the research, we discovered that these vases presently at Dolmabahce Palace were actually exactly the same thing that was presented in 1873 Vienna exhibition. That means before that, we used to think that Abdulhamid II was very, the Sultan, who was very close to Japan and had opened official relations for the first time. But before Abdulhamid II, these Japanese collections were already in Istanbul, at least as early as 1873. And in Vienna exhibition, Japanese and Ottoman pavilions were side by side. So it is very likely that the Ottoman government purchased those. In the end, I'd like to mention now, I spoke about the Ottoman approach to Pan-Islamism, Pan-Asianism, and including Japan. In contrary, I'd like to suggest the Japanese approach to Pan-Islamism. One of the earliest example is the ex-building is Tokyo Imperial Museum in the same place of today's Tokyo National Museum, that was designed by a British architect, Josiah Kondo. Unfortunately, it was damaged by the Great Kanto earthquakes in the beginning of the 20th century. So present building is made later on. But this was in style called Indo-Saracen, that British colonial style, actually. So we see very interesting details of Islamic designs in Japan. And actually, after this, in the 80s, Japan didn't have this kind of approach, Orientalist approach. But after that, Ito Chuta comes. After his visit to the Ottoman Empire and his war trip, he started to design monuments and buildings in different styles. This is his design in 1912 in Indo-Saracen style. Actually, for Nishihonganji, the patron was Otani Kozui that Elder mentioned. And of course, Nirakso was in that line. And what Ito Chuta is called in Pan-Asian, in the context of Pan-Asianism, his masterpiece, Tsukiji Honganji, is in Indian Chatya style. And actually, he designed in different styles in Asian countries, such as Yushima Seido in Chinese style. It is a Confucius temple. In conclusion, I'd like to present this painting in oil, that means in Western style, which was gifted by Abdülhamid II to Emperor Meiji. After the return trip of Hiei and Congo, they brought back some presents from Padishah to the Emperor Meiji, and this one was included, and depicting Ottoman traditional architectural representation, Rustem Pasha Jami, and in style of Western painting, that was a meaningful gift in this today's context. Thank you for listening.